If you've been watching the national headlines, you've probably heard that affordability is improving. Mortgage rates are lower than they were a year ago. Price growth has moderated. Wages are rising. But what does that actually mean for our local area, places like Springfield Township, Mount Airy, and Chestnut Hill? Today I'm going to break down what's happening nationally, what we're seeing across the Philadelphia region, and most importantly, what the local data tells us about pricing strategy right now. Because in this market, strategy determines outcome. Nationally, the backdrop has improved. Mortgage rates are roughly 1 full percentage point lower than they were this time last year. On a $500,000 loan, that translates to roughly $350 per month in savings compared to January of 2025. Home prices are still rising, but at a slower, healthier pace than we saw in 2021 and 2022. Wage growth is currently outpacing home price growth. Historically, when mortgage rates move into the low to mid 6% range, buyer activity increases. So nationally, the tailwind is real, but national averages do not tell you how a constrained suburban market behaves, especially one with limited inventory like ours. So let's bring it closer to home. Now let's zoom to the broad Philadelphia metro area, where the home demand index for February sits at 60. That's up from last month, but slightly below where we were this time last year. What does that mean? Demand is stabilizing. It is not exploding. It is not collapsing. It's measured. Buys are active but selective, payment sensitive, inventory aware. That's important context as we move into the spring market. And according to the January housing report from the Bright MLS, the region currently sits at approximately 1.85 months of supply. That's up slightly from roughly 1.71 months this time last year. What does that tell us? Inventory is rising modestly, but it's still under 2 months of supply. Structurally, that remains tight and strongly in seller's market territory. Median days on market across the metro area now sits at 26 days. That's up from 21 days a year ago. Homes are still selling, but they're taking slightly longer than they did last year. That shift is important. It reinforces what we're seeing locally. Buyers are active, but they're more selective. The median sale price across the metro area now sits at approximately $380,000. Prices are not collapsing. They're stabilizing. Inventory is increasing gradually. Days on market is extending modestly, but supply remains limited. So the metro story heading into spring is this: not a frenzy, not a downturn, a controlled normalization. Now let's bring that down to some of the local markets. Let's start with Springfield Township in Montgomery County. Looking at structural supply, inventory sits at 16 homes. When we calculate a 12-month absorption rate using current inventory divided by the average number of homes sold over the previous 12 months, we're looking at under 1 month of supply. Structurally, that is very tight. This is not an oversupplied market. Looking at short-term momentum, January showed 3 closings, but here's the critical point. Closings reflect buyer behavior from roughly 45 to 60 days earlier. So January closings tell us about late November and December demand. That is typically a slower period due to the seasonality, holidays, and rate hesitation. So 3 closings does not mean January demand collapsed. It means late fall momentum softened. That distinction matters. Looking at conversion and pricing friction. In low inventory markets, what remains active is often slightly overpriced, condition sensitive, or misaligned with buyer expectations. When those homes eventually close, they tend to show higher cumulative days on market. That does not mean buyers disappeared. It means pricing discipline is separating the homes that sell from the homes that sit. Right now in Springfield, the homes priced strategically are moving. The homes testing the market are sitting longer. That is the defining feature of this moment. Mount Airy tells a slightly different story. Looking at structural supply, inventory is just under 50 homes. Absorption sits in roughly 2 to 3 month range. That remains seller leaning. Looking at momentum and buyer behavior, sales have been steady over the trailing year. However, cumulative days on market have crept up compared to the ultra-tight conditions of 2021 and early 2022. That suggests buyers are taking more time. They are comparing, they are negotiating. Mount Airy is competitive, but not forgiving. If a home is priced correctly and presented well, it'll move. If it overshoots, buyers will wait. Chestnut Hill remains the most constrained of these 3 local markets. Inventory is approximately 10 homes, less than half of what we saw a year ago. Absorption remains around 1 month of supply structurally. That is tight. However, cumulative days on market is higher than Springfield. Luxury buyers are deliberate. They're well capitalized but analytical. They do not chase. So while supply is tight, pricing precision matters even more at the higher end. Let's bring this together. Nationally, affordability is improving. Regionally, demand is stabilizing. Locally, inventory remains tight, but momentum softened in late fall, and buyers are selective. That combination creates a strategic market, not a frenzy, not a downturn, a strategic market. If you're selling, this is not a list high and see what happens market. Overpricing does not create leverage, it creates friction. And friction shows up in cumulative days on market and eventually price reductions. Equity is maximized through strategy, not optimism. If you're buying, rates are lower than they were a year ago. Competition is rising gradually. There's still room for negotiation, especially on the homes that have been sitting. Waiting for rates to drop another 0.25% may cost more in price competition than it saves in payment. The national story says the ship is catching a tailwind. The local story says pricing strategy determines outcome. If you would like a customized breakdown for your property or your search area, we at the DiFranco team at Elfant, Wissahickon Realtors are happy to provide you with one. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again next month.